Good afternoon. Sean here, Mountains Garage. You're not going to believe it, but another day working on the 72 Nova. 6-liter, twin-turbo project. In what's becoming a familiar theme, while looking for parts to do one project, I found parts to build another. That makes me happy. It's like Christmas, and you weren't expecting it. So project number one today is to do something with the track locator. As I mentioned in the other video, this is just a direct thread piece of tubing. Somebody ran a tap into it. It's pretty spindly, and I don't have any desire to run it. So in the process of seeing what I had for parts to build the wishbone I talked about, I stumbled across this. Right and left hand rod ends that go into chromoly 1-inch tubing, which I have a few lengths of. So I'm just going to take the easy road here and build a new track locator out of this. It'll be much stronger. And I'm going to cross the wishbone off the list. This was just a piece of mild steel, and like every other fastener on the car, not actually long enough to engage a lock nut. That's not going to work, but I can reuse these. And let's get after building a new one. I'm doing some non-tape measure measuring. The old track locator was already the right length. Obviously the tubes adapters make it so the tubing itself will be shorter. My rear end was already centered, so I choose to put the rod in flush with the threads. Makes it about 3/4 of the way in. In theory, I guess, when the rear end is centered, you'd have this halfway, but it's not something I'm going to be adjusting very seldom, if ever, once it's set. So I'd rather have the rod in 3/4 of the way in. It seems stronger. The rod ends are right and left hand thread, so when it's in place, all you do is loosen the lock nut and spin the actual track locator to move the rear end side to side. Typically when I cut chromoly, I use my chop saw because it doesn't have any trouble. It does stainless and chromoly without complaining, where the bandsaws, the blades, the current crop of blades that I own, don't like anything that hard. Now, I'm sure if you're listening out there and you know what type of blade I need to do stainless steel pipe or tubing and chromoly, let me know. I bought a bunch of blades for my new bandsaw, and so far I haven't installed them. I'm still using the one that came with it. I don't know what that is either, so I guess I could try it on the bandsaw and see what happens. My horizontal bandsaw, I know my blades are not very hardy, the ones I have. I had a bunch of blades that fit my other horizontal bandsaw, and I had them shortened to fit this machine. Even on Saturday, this has been my faithful cutter of dry shaft tubing and exhaust tubing for a while. I shagged the first blade on the second cut and immediately ruined the second one on the same cut. So I don't usually have a problem cutting chromoly dry shaft with a little bit of lube, and now I need to get some wheels for my rigid too. But I do see they make some that say they're for stainless steel, potentially hotter. So I'm in a quest to find better cutting devices. While I was debating it in my head as to how I was going to cut it off, I'd already dragged out the chop saw, plugged it in, and cut it off. A little chamfer and polish in the lathe, leaving a nice V to weld. I'll do the other end and I'll dig out the TIG welder. It actually took longer to drag out the TIG welder leads than it did to weld both ends of the track locator. This was 125 amps, ER70S6-2 rod, blue tungsten, 25 CFH. When I did the drive shaft 2 videos ago, I did that 90 amps and I held the pedal wide open. This was 125. I was able to start the arc and then back it off and move along really fast. So if I had the drive shaft to do over again, which I have another one to do for the 71 Nova, I think I'll turn it up I like to move right along just to get it over with. I'm just kidding. It's fun when things go right. TIG welding, that is. Okay, I'm happy with that. It looks a lot more like a race car part. I started questioning myself afterwards. I cut a large V-groove, and it's a pretty fat weld. I could have drilled a hole and plug welded it also, but it's only 1" 065 moly, and that adapter only goes into about here, so I could still plunge into it with an end mill and weld it if I thought it was really necessary, but this is what I typically do. I'll critique it afterwards to see what I could have done better or different. And if I send a picture to somebody, they do the same thing, which I like. I like feedback. In this case, I was just looking at them last night and saw that most of them are plug welded. But I'm just going to dismiss it out of my head and move on to the next project. I'll probably paint it black. I read a chassis book once, and it claimed that a grade 8 bolt, which this is stronger in clamping, but not as strong in shear as a grade 5. A grade 5 would move before it broke, but you don't see anybody using grade 5 on suspension parts typically. I'm not more food for thought. If you have thoughts on that, let them fly as well. If you've ever spent any time looking at a Pro Stock or a Pro Mod car, every bolt has been shortened so it just does its job, and there's no extra weight hanging off there. They would never run a bolt this long. They'd have to cut it off. It all adds up, I guess. When 4-link rear suspensions first came out, they were like this: 3/4 fine thread, 3/4 bolt. Then they transitioned to 3/4 5/8 bolt. Now I believe they're 3/4 1/2" bolt, and you'll see a lot more holes, and there'll be a doubling plate on here to make it stronger. And they have a lot more adjustments, thousands of adjustments probably. In this case, I need to study radial tire 4-link settings because you want the car to lift up instead of squat. There's a lot of guys going really fast on leaf springs, and it's pretty amazing. I guess the advantage of a 4-link, if the rules allow, is if a car starts wheeling, you can probably calm it down, whereas you have a leaf spring setup, you're limited to shock and front suspension and weight movement, I guess, to try to get it to stop wheeling. None of that really applies to my 72 Nova because it's just a pro street car that might see the track every now and then. I'm going to build it like a race car for the most part, but it's nothing compared to what's going on these days and how fast people are going. And the way the classes are written, this car would be a 315 tire. I could put a 275 on it, that's okay, but I don't have stock rear frame rails, so that kind of takes you out of a lot of the street car classes. I do have a stock front suspension, but this already has rear frame rails in it, so that probably doesn't allow you to do a lot of small tire racing. But it's not my goal anyway. If it was, I wouldn't be working on this. I'd be working on something else. This is just fun and building parts out of stuff you have laying around. The only reason I can afford either car is because I don't mind working with used parts and sprinkling in new parts when they're needed and doing everything myself. I could never afford to pay anybody to do anything. So I'll be happy. I probably will tell you the total number in the 72, what we're looking at right now, when I'm done, but it'll be shockingly low. Money invested for what it is. There's been a lot of talk about safety after all the events of last weekend in the drag racing world. And you probably noticed I try to do things as safe as possible. I already have a fire system for this car. It'll have an engine diaper. I've certainly put enough supports on the drive shaft to contain that, I hope. And the whole build will be safe. I have no desire to burn. I said if I ever make another pass out, I always wore a 15 layer suit. I could have that reserted and probably use it again, but if I was to buy stuff, I'll buy all 20 and funny car boots and the whole mess. If you're gonna sweat, You might as well have the gear that's going to do you some good. As I fuss over my welds, did you ever notice what GM did? Looks like they used a caulking gun and wiped it around with their finger. Yeah. That was acceptable, I guess. Maybe today it's better. I haven't looked lately. I wish I had found more -20 fittings in the box of stuff I bought, because these things are about 40 bucks a piece. Oh well. It'll be worth it in the end. I'll have a couple $100 in coolant hoses, I guess. The Trailblazer SS intake always had a drive-by-wire throttle body. I did find that throttle cable brackets are custom made for these, and I actually bought one for 17 bucks. I don't need the cruise hole, but you never know. Maybe I'll hook up cruise control someday. I like that they're adjustable front and back. So I have a early 2000 Silverado throttle cable that'll work just fine on this end. And I need to massage the hole. This is a rectangle where it pushes through, and the factory hole is kind of square, but a little work with a file. I believe the Silverado throttle cable is just the right length. And under the dash, I use a cable ferrule. That way you can adjust the height of your pedal. It works really well. I've done that on everything so far, reusing these Silverado throttle cables. The universal cable I had, the end was different. Even though they list a lot of aftermarket LS cables with the same end, I need that barrel that's actually made onto the cable. I haven't figured out the other style yet. Maybe it's too simple for me to understand. That's a joke I use a lot because I tend to overcomplicate things. I didn't do any measuring when I built this tank. I just kind of winged it. It actually fits. My son and I did some non-destructive testing yesterday with the Throttle bottle, and this thing holds more than 3 liters. We stopped at 3 liters. That's big. That'll work if I do use it. My front engine drive setup is Camaro spacing. In the next video, I'm going to solve the alternator mount issue. I've got it sitting up here right now. This is 4th gen Camaro Firebird. They mount the alternator here, and on a 6 liter they don't drill this hole, but you can. The Model A, I drilled and tapped that hole and used F-body brackets. And I've kind of goofed around doing some measuring and stuff, and this little relief will pretty much allow me to put it in there if I drilled this hole this way a little bit. And I wasn't really in love with that idea, but then I have to put, I don't have to, but I want to secure this freeze plug in like I did on the rear of the cylinder head on both sides and the front. So I have these 3 holes available and some more up here. I could run an aluminum piece down. Stand by while I fumble around. You know, something like this. And then I could pick up the bolt hole for the alternator anywhere I wanted, because it needs to go a little bit closer to the block to give me about an 1/8 inch clearance here. The motor's not going to move because it's solid mounted, so once it clears the frame, I'm good to go. But then I got goofing around the same principle, and I could just, because currently this bolt doesn't thread into anything, but the whole alternator needs to come ahead about 1 inch. So I can incorporate a spacer on that bolt, and this will be part of my spacer on this side. And I believe I like it up here better. So, again, that'll be in the next video. I did stick the headers back on. I may or may not have to shorten this up here. I'm going to wait and find out, but I'm actually pretty happy with now that I've got these headers so they bolt on. Plug wires won't be a problem. I'm probably still going to run my coils up here, maybe facing the engine, or I might put them on the firewall, I'm not sure. I like them on the engine, just seems easier, and I want plug wires that are not going to burn. I like the tank that I built, the puke tank we were just playing with, but I also like this wide open space. I could mount the coils up here. We'll see. It's all fun and games. My first job was at a transmission shop, and we did have lifts, but they were the old hydraulic ones with the hoses in the floor, and this was right next to the ocean, and there was a lot of groundwater, and occasionally you'd blow the hose and they didn't have any safety devices. Pretty scary. They'd also get airbound in the last 3 or 4 feet that when the vehicle's at the top, they'd shoot right up to the top and almost throw the vehicle off the lift. What I did like about that style lift, the twin post, you had control and you could tilt the whole car right up when you're working under the hood. If you had a light behind you, it was fantastic for working on stuff. But new electric over hydraulic lifts with safety locks, you just can't beat it. I mean, I'm sitting in the chair working on stuff. My third job, I worked 5 or 6 years at a transmission shop, and we didn't have lifts. We had jack stands. You would not believe the incredible strength you can get in your neck. To this day, I can lay and watch TV and hold my head up and not use a pillow. Because we never used the headrest on a creeper. You just held your head up all day long. My buddy, if he watches this, he'll understand because he was right there with me. But these lifts were not expensive, an excellent investment. I'm glad I did. The whole shop makes me happy. Money well spent. Especially, for the last year where I haven't really gone anywhere. I would have gone nuts by now if I couldn't work on some stuff. Thank God for that. Well, thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, all that stuff. Tomorrow we're going to fix the alternator. One way or the other.